Today I want to talk about some of my pet peeves in modern media today. I don't like how modern media likes to mess with the old media and lore. There seems to be some questionable decisions being made for some adaptations in movies, shows, and games today. It's very frustrating when writers and producers get brought on to bring a book series to life or bring a video game to the TV screen, and they change up everything because they want to do it their way. It's also frustrating to see people take an established story and ignore that story and all the lore and just completely change the way the characters act in, say, a sequel trilogy. You might know what I'm referring to here. Sometimes creators are afraid to show offensive things that are important to understanding a story or real-life situation. So I'm going to be talking about a couple of different examples of this stuff today. Now, the first example I want to talk about is probably the most recent and more relevant thing, and that's the excitement that has been stirring up for the upcoming live-action adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender on Netflix. That excitement quickly turned into controversy and debate because the cast of the show recently revealed that the character Sokka would be undergoing a change in his personality. They don't want him to be sexist in the show. Let's also not forget that the creators of the animated show left the production back in 2020 due to creative differences. I want to give my thoughts on this Avatar situation and talk about some of these other pet peeves that I've mentioned in some other shows and movies that I could bring up as examples. So, let's get into it. So Avatar fans have become critical of late on the Netflix show because the change in Sokka's personality. In the animated show, Sokka was a unique character. He was very complex and in my opinion had some of the best character development that I've ever seen in a character across everything I've watched over the years. Yes, it is easy to point out rather quickly that Sokka was sexist and an idiot from time to time in the show, and as a whole he was cocky, arrogant, immature, and funny in many different ways. But he also was loyal to his sister and his friends, and he did a lot of growing up during the show. In order to create growth for characters, you need to give them flaws. Flaws are important to a character's arc and development, and you want that arc to be compelling. Taking this flaw out of Sokka's character eliminates a part of his growth. Kiawentio Tarbell, the actor who plays Katara, said this about the decision. "I feel like we also took out the element of how sexist Sokka was. I feel like there were a lot of moments in the original show that were iffy." Well, of course it's iffy. It is shitty to treat women like that. But again, he grows up as the show goes on, as he forms relationships with girls he meets along the way. They earn each other's respect, and he does show remorse for treating them so poorly. Sokka's relationship with Suki, the Kyoshi warrior, is one of the greatest parts of the show in my opinion. Not just for Sokka, but one of the most memorable moments in the show as a whole. They start off at odds with each other, but then Sokka quickly learns just how tough of a warrior she is. Sokka eventually apologizes and they actually develop feelings for each other and have a relationship. Isn't this a good thing to show? How they go from being at odds to becoming friends and respecting each other, and actually they appreciate each other enough to where they get in a relationship? And here's something about Katara too. Avatar showrunner Albert Kim said that Katara won't embody a traditional maternal role in the live-action show. And here's Kim's quote on that. "There are certain roles I think that Katara did in the cartoon that we didn't necessarily also do here. I don't want to really get into a lot of that, but some gender issues that didn't quite translate from the cartoon." In the animated show, Katara struggles with being a kid, being a fighter, a healer, and taking care of her brother and their friends along the way. One of the most emotional moments of the show is when Sokka admits that he can't remember his mother's face and that Katara was forced into that motherly role early on. They have both gone through so much at such a young age, and it's very rewarding to see just how much they grow up as the show goes on. By the end, they are strong leaders and good people. One final thing to bring up about Avatar, and I almost forgot about this because it happened way back in 2020, a year with so much bullshit. The original creators of Avatar, Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, they left the project after spending 2 years developing it. DiMartino published a letter on his personal website about it. When Brian and I signed on to the project in 2018, we were hired as executive producers and showrunners. In a joint announcement for the series, Netflix said that it was committed to honoring our vision for this retelling and to support us on creating the series, and we expressed how excited we were for the opportunity to be at the helm. Unfortunately, things didn't go as we had hoped. You know, I really don't understand why these modern-day showrunners disrespect the original creators of these stories. There is no appreciation for them or the amazing stories and characters and lore that they came up with. And it's really disappointing to see this because modern Hollywood is becoming more and more ignorant of the past. And look, I don't want them to make the exact same show in live action form. I don't need to see the exact same story scene by scene and episode by episode, but changes should come in the form of adding new lore, adding more to the story, new characters, battles, situations, new side quests and adventures are welcome. That stuff's cool. But don't change it up to the point where literally you're making the creators feel unwanted and then they freaking leave the production. And these showrunners are even pissing off actors. Henry Cavill left The Witcher after season 3 because he didn't like how the show's creators were writing the show, and specifically their treatment of Henry's character, Geralt of Rivia, the main character of not only the books, but the show that they're making the story about. Apparently, Henry had creative differences with showrunner Lauren Hissrich. Prior to season 2, Henry said that he pushed for Geralt's depiction to be more accurate to the books. Henry is actually a fan of both the books and the games, and I really do appreciate that, by the way. Having people, specifically actors, who appreciate the content for the project, working on it as well, is awesome. We need more of this, actually. The second season of the Halo show was released at the time of me putting this video together. Actually, I watched the premiere of the first 2 episodes, so I might be a little extra feisty about this one. But after watching those first 2 episodes, hey, the show is still laughable. I really wanted to like this show, but man, this show looks and feels nothing like the game. For God's sakes, we saw Master Chief's bare ass in the first season. He also had sex with a human that works for the Covenant. We hardly see Chief in the iconic helmet and armor. And this is all due to the showrunners not focusing on the games for inspiration, but the characters and the world. How do you look at the characters and the world and not notice anything else from the games? And I know there's graphic novels that explore the lore, but it's a no-brainer to look at the flipping video games. That's why people are coming to watch this show. The audience is primarily made up of gamers. And former showrunner from season 1, Stephen Kane, literally admitted in an interview that they didn't look at the games at all. And he did say game, by the way. They didn't talk about the game because they didn't want to be limited by the game. Hey Stephen, they made multiple games, by the way. So you had multiple sources for inspiration and ideas. And again, new ideas and creativity is welcomed, but the expectations for the audience in this show is that they expect it to be similar to the games, and the show comes nowhere close to that. I want to point out one more ridiculous thing too about Kane. Kane decided to leave the show because of how much work it took, which led to him losing time with his family. Now, okay, I get that. You got the right to make that decision. However, in his quote, he mentions that he never thought the show would be more than 1 season. Who hired this guy? He had no long-term commitment, and him thinking the show would be just 1 8-episode season is wild. And it's interesting to read these quotes from these articles and then go and read his Twitter statements back in the day where he basically defended himself and claimed that the headlines misinterpreted what he said. And he claims that they did do extensive research by talking to the game studio and looking at the graphic novels and looking at the games. You know, I'm assuming they did something, but their choice to completely ignore and not do anything remotely close to what's in the games, and Master Chief, who's the main character in the main games, they completely made him a different person. And again, he thought he was signing on for just 8 episodes. Like, what's the deal with these adaptations not getting people that A, know the lore well, and B, just don't seem to really give a shit, and they don't really seem to want to be committed to do this for the long run? Again, who hired this guy? And ultimately, to me, again, it just doesn't really add up, and thankfully both showrunners from season 1 are gone. Steven is gone, and so is Kyle Killen. The new showrunner is Dave Weiner, and he said that he was determined to make season 2 an 8-episode war movie, essentially. And, well, I hope to see more fighting and game-inspired stuff in the second season, but we shall see, because the first 2 episodes that I watched didn't look like that at all. But, you know, we'll see what happens, and maybe I will make a season 2 review later on and just talk about where this show is after 2 seasons. So stay tuned on that one. Now, I don't want to get into a big Star Wars rant because I've done that in enough videos on my channel that you could go check out after this, but for the sake of another example for this topic, let's look at the sequel trilogy in Star Wars, specifically Episode 8. Rian Johnson wanted to try new things in The Last Jedi, but in the process of trying new things, he fudged up stuff that should have never been touched. The character of Luke Skywalker in the sequel trilogy is one of the big reasons why people didn't like Episode 8, and the whole trilogy for that matter. Luke is one of the most important characters in the franchise, not just because he has the Skywalker name, but literally for what he did in the grand scheme of things in the Star Wars universe. In the original trilogy, he helps the rebellion defeat the Empire. He trains to be a Jedi and brings the Jedi Order back. He redeems his father and helps take down the Emperor. His character arc puts him through great character development, and he had his own low points. We saw that. But for whatever reason, they decide to make him a depressed old hermit in the sequel trilogy when at this point, yes, he's old at this point in the timeline, but he should be full of wisdom, and he should be teaching the young characters and passing the baton to them since they're the future of Star Wars, not throwing his frickin' lightsaber off a cliff. The sequel trilogy was extremely disrespectful to Mark Hamill, the actor, and also George Lucas, the creator. Here we go again, the creator of the franchise. And we rip up his script because, you know, he sold the company, and okay, that's all fine and dandy. It's fair under business law. However, they could have let George ride off in the sunset and conclude the Skywalker saga, do the sequel trilogy, and then he moves on for good. But we know how businesses are. They get greedy because they got the property and they want to make the money and they want to do stuff their ways. And it's a damn shame because the original Star Wars was tarnished by J.J. Abrams, Rian Johnson, and Kathleen Kennedy. Now, one last thing before I wrap up this video, I want to bring this full circle by going back to the original topic of removing sensitive content from a project. There was a lot of debate when the two most recent World War II Call of Duties came out. Call of Duty World War II censored out swastikas specifically, and Vanguard included the option to turn off the swastikas and have them replaced with the Iron Cross, and Vanguard also did not have factions in the multiplayer. People did find it weird that you could play as any operator during a multiplayer match, and teams would be combined then with operators from both the Allied forces and the Axis powers. The one thing that made me laugh personally in multiplayer comes from the scoreboard. You know, it wasn't Germany versus the Red Army or the United States Marines versus the Japanese. It wasn't even the Allies versus the Axis powers anymore like in Call of Duty World War II. The team names in Vanguard were My Team and Enemy Team. What? Let's remember, folks, you aren't being racist, arrogant, or rude by putting in the exact content the way it exactly was in the time period of what you're trying to, you know, what the theme is of your game, movie, show, whatever it is. And Call of Duty has never promoted being a Nazi or celebrating war crimes. If anything, Call of Duty, specifically World at War, showed the brutality of war, and it depicted the war for what it was. It wasn't afraid to show the brutality of both sides, the Allies and the Axis powers. Having the real flags and the real names for those involved in this conflict should not be considered offensive. It's educational, it's historical. What should offend people, in my opinion, is the ridiculous campaign in Vanguard. The story was stupid, as it forced itself to throw together a squad of Allied soldiers from different countries, and I think they really thought that they did something cool by adding in a female Russian soldier and a black soldier from England. The story was over the top, and it seemed like the goal of the campaign was to make this Allied squad look like and feel like a group of superhero soldiers. If they really wanted to honor all those who did serve in the war and pay a little bit more homage to minorities and other groups of people that maybe don't get talked about as much in the history books, well, they could have done like Battlefield 1 and 5 did with the war stories. In Battlefield 1 and 5, they featured missions that focused on black soldiers in World War I, Arabic rebels in World War I, female Norwegian resistance members in World War II, and also during World War II, French African soldiers. Instead of honoring real soldiers from real battles, we get Polina Petrova, who says at one point in the campaign, "I shoot Nazis. They die. That's my plan." Wow, that's riveting stuff. That's really honoring the exact history and those that actually were involved in the conflict. And it's funny because that's the irony with modern media today, is that while they censor out stuff to not offend people, they end up doing it anyways by disrespecting those that were involved in horrible real-life situations like the World War II conflict, or disrespecting those that created masterpieces like Star Wars and Avatar: The Last Airbender. Well, that's enough ranting for me today. Let me know your thoughts on this video in the comments down below. Check out other videos on the channel and subscribe for more. You can also find my content on podcasting platforms. Just Google Analyze This Podcast. I'm also on X and TikTok, X at AnalyzeThis_YT and TikTok at AnalyzeThis54_YT. Thanks again and take care.